Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today is not going to be how my typical videos usually are. I'm going to be talking about a very serious topic. I just today learned a lot of new things about this topic because I watched a very deep dive video on this whole case, and it occurred to me that not a lot of people have the attention span to sit through an hour and a half long video on that type of thing like I did. So I decided that I wanted to kind of shorten the story, but still get the point across. So that being said, today we're going to be talking about the infamous serial killer and cannibal of Milwaukee, Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was always a quiet child. He wasn't always weird or odd, but the weird actions did start at a young age. They just didn't progress as far as they did until he got older and moved away from his parents. Now, these weird things that started as a child consisted of finding dead animals in the woods and playing with them as if they were dolls or toys. And his parents found that quite odd, as any parent would, but they didn't do anything about it. They told him not to do that anymore, yet he continued to do that. And there was even a time where Jeffrey Dahmer came across a dog, and he had planned to skin it and kill it, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it, and he let the dog go. But that's the type of things that would go through his head at a very young age. Now, Jeffrey Dahmer's father, Lionel, mentioned in his own book that he wrote about his family that there was always a lot of tension in his home, and that there were things going on under the surface that people who knew them didn't know about. Now, Jeffrey Dahmer had both of his parents in his life for some time, but his parents had marital issues, and they ended up getting divorced later on. Jeffrey Dahmer also had a little brother named David, who isn't really relevant to the story right now, but he will be later on. Now, some of the things that Jeffrey would do to these animal carcasses consisted of bathing them in chemicals, dissecting them, or just, collecting them. What type of normal child does that? Obviously none. So that's definitely an early on sign that something was wrong up here, but his parents never acted on it. His parents never got him checked out. That only came after all of the horrible, horrifying things that he had done in his adult life came out. So, yeah. There was an incident when Jeffrey was probably in his tweens where he was in the woods, and it wasn't said if it was a dead dog or a live one, but as far as I can tell, it was dead. Because he didn't usually do anything to live animals. It was usually carcasses. But what he did to this dog was he took a stick and impaled its head with the stick, which is absolutely insane. Jeffrey Dahmer was also an alcoholic. He abused alcohol since he was a teenager, and he had a severe problem with that, and alcohol was always a factor in his killings. They always went into his plan, or not they, but alcohol always was a factor in his plans of how to. Jeffrey would drink liquor during school hours. He would hide bottles of hard liquor in his locker, and between classes he would drink some, and teachers wouldn't care. They'd let it slide because it was a different time. They didn't want to associate with that type of thing. They didn't care. So that also kind of goes into this. Jeffrey began feeling very compulsive, and he needed to have complete control over others. That was his drive towards his killings and other things, because he was struggling with basically coming out, to put it in like today's terms, but he was struggling with homosexuality, and he wasn't sure how to deal with it the correct way. And what made the whole situation worse for Jeffrey was the fact that he was a very lonely kid, and he had no friends, no significant other, no knowledge of any of that type of stuff. And he just felt very alone. And that was also part of his drive towards doing some of the things that he ended up doing later in his life. He had many fantasies about doing things to unconscious or dead guys. And that's sort of where everything concerning people started. These thoughts just got worse and worse. His urges ended up being so strong that he could not fight them. Jeffrey Dahmer's first murder occurred when he was 18. He met this hitchhiker named Steve Mark Hicks on a road while he was driving, and the hitchhiker wanted to go to a concert and he needed a ride. And Jeffrey, having the thoughts that he did, picked up the guy and suggested that they go to his house first for some beers, some drinks, before the concert. Hicks agreed to go to Jeffrey's home and have some drinks, and that was the start of Jeffrey Dahmer's downfall. He took the man back to his house, they had some drinks, and when the guy, Hicks, said that they should get going to the concert, Jeffrey then took a dumbbell and hit Hicks in the back of the head with the dumbbell, and then proceeded to strangle him with the handle of the dumbbell. And after that, he did some pretty unspeakable things with the body of that man, and then he proceeded to dismember him and dispose of his body in the woods. In a later interview, when Dahmer was caught with all of his crimes, he said that he didn't know why he hit him, but he wanted to stay with him longer. And Dahmer also has said in interviews that he didn't kill out of anger or hatred. He killed for the sole purpose of wanting to feel close to someone and wanting to feel like he had complete dominance over these people. Now, Dahmer buried the remains of Hicks somewhere in a shallow grave, but he couldn't leave them there. So he went back a couple days later, dug up the body pieces, and proceeded to take the flesh off of the bones of the body and dissolve the flesh and then scatter the bones throughout the woods. Now, shortly after Dahmer's first killing, he went off to college. However, he didn't stay in college long because his grades were not good. So he dropped out of college and he didn't kill for a very long time. It was 9 years before Jeffrey Dahmer killed another person. Now, another reason Jeffrey did not stay in college is because of his very bad alcohol abuse. A little while after Jeffrey dropped out of college, his father persuaded him to join the military, and he was stationed in West Germany. Jeffrey was enlisted in the military from 1978 to 1981, and he was honorably discharged because of his alcoholism. There have been a couple men who have come out after Jeffrey Dahmer was caught that he essayed them while in service, and that definitely adds a lot to the story, but there's not many details out about that, so yeah. In late 1981, Jeffrey Dahmer moved to Milwaukee, back to Milwaukee from Ohio, to live with his grandmother, and he was doing well for a while there, until he started going to gay bars and picking up men and bringing them home, which is where the real issue started. This is where the real spree of things actually came into play. Living with his grandmother, Jeffrey would go to church on Sundays. He even found a job working at a chocolate factory, and he was a mixer there, and he held that job for multiple years. Although, while in Milwaukee, as I said earlier, he started going to gay bars, along with going to bathhouses as well, and that is where his drugging started. He started putting sedatives in men's drinks, and then while the men were unconscious, he would then try to use them for sexual gratification. Now, Jeffrey had gotten arrested a couple times before for different offenses, one of those being alcoholism, and the other one I'm not exactly sure what it was, but that's the one that we're talking about right now. He had a probation officer, and he told his probation officer about a fantasy that he had had, and this fantasy consisted of digging up a dead body from a cemetery and doing some very weird things to it, like sexual things. But he never followed through on that plan, although he did try, but apparently the dirt was too hard, and a dog chased him away from the cemetery. Jeffrey Dahmer found an obituary for an 18-year-old man that had passed away, and he even attended the funeral of this man to see his corpse. And then a couple days later is when he attempted his plan, but failed because a dog chased him away. Not because something in his conscience told him that this is not right. No, it was a dog, and the dirt was too hard to dig up. That is absolutely insane and very inhumane. Now, Jeffrey Dahmer's second victim was, I believe, named Stephen Tuomi. I don't know if I'm saying the last name right, but Jeffrey and Stephen met at a gay bar, and Jeffrey had rented a hotel room for that night, and he asked Stephen to go back to the room with him, and Stephen agreed. They had some drinks, and Jeffrey got very drunk, apparently, and he fell into a deep slumber. He was in a haze, and when he woke up, beside him was the dead body of Stephen. And Jeffrey Dahmer said that he had no recollection of killing this man, but when he woke up, he was so panicked that he had to find a way to get rid of the body. So he went out and he bought a really big suitcase, and this is really crazy, but he went out and he bought a really big suitcase, and he brought the suitcase back, and he crammed Stephen's corpse into the suitcase, and he checked out of the hotel and brought the suitcase with him, and nobody raised an eyebrow or anything. Jeffrey's original plan with this man, not much better than what actually ended up happening, but his plan apparently wasn't to kill him, Stephen, but to sedate him and then take advantage of him in sexual ways, like he has with the other men that he killed. But yeah. After Dahmer checked out of the hotel, he went back to his grandma's house, and he went into the basement. He brought the suitcase into the basement. He took Stephen out of the suitcase, and he proceeded to dismember him. After that, hold up, let me check my facts. Now, okay, Dahmer waited a couple weeks before dismembering Stephen because he wanted the body to decompose a little bit before he dismembered him. And then when he finished dismembering him, he put his body pieces into trash bags and waited for the weekly trash pickup and put the garbage bags with the weekly trash pickup. Let that sink in. Like, imagine being a person who picks up trash, like a garbage man, and you pick up the trash and there's a weird smell coming from the garbage cans or whatever. Genuinely, do you guys ever think about that? There could be a dead body in there. And in this case, there was. Now, with Stephen, he didn't give away, or throw away, he didn't throw away every piece of Stephen. This is where the souvenir keeping started, as Jeffrey would call it. So, when Jeffrey cut off Stephen's head, he kept it. As, like I said, he would call it a souvenir, a thing to remember his victims by. And that's where the souvenirs started. That's when he started keeping people's body parts when he killed them. Now, this is also when Jeffrey started experimenting with trying to permanently preserve people's body parts. At first, Jeffrey kept the man's head wrapped in a blanket in his freezer in his basement. However, then, about 2 weeks later, he tried to use acids and chemicals to try and permanently preserve the head of Stephen. Now, Dahmer's attempt to permanently preserve the head of Stephen did not work, and at the end of the day there were no remains of Stephen. Dahmer's third victim was named Jamie Doxtator, or James Doxtator, but went by Jamie. Now, Jamie was a teen, and he was living on the streets, and Dahmer came across him, and he promised him $50 in exchange for taking nude photos. And this is where Dahmer's signature plan came into play for the very first time. This is how Dahmer would lure his victims back to his place. He would tell them that he would pay them to take nude photos, and then he would take them back to his place, take the photos, and then he would give them liquor with a sedative in it, sleeping pills, and then when they were unconscious, he would take advantage of them, and then he would, or vice versa, he would and then take advantage of them. But if I'm remembering correctly from the video I watched earlier today, it was the other way around. He would sedate them and then take advantage of them and kill them after, because he would have to dismember them, and then he would, have to dissolve the tissue. And it's a very detailed video that I watched, and it is a very, very horrifying story. As everyone who's ever heard the name Jeffrey Dahmer knows, it's a very crazy case, and it is not something anyone should take lightly. So, yeah. Now, at this point in time, Jeffrey was still living with his grandmother, so Jeffrey would take these men into the basement of his grandmother's house, and he would do his whole process, and then there would be a smell. And there was a point in time where his grandmother started noticing the smell, this very foul odor coming from her basement. And so she asked Jeffrey, "What's that smell? Why does it smell so bad down there?" Keep in mind, she knew that he would bring boys down there all the time, or men, should I say. She didn't know what they would do. She didn't know. The video cut off, but as I was saying, Dahmer's grandmother didn't know that the boys that he brought down to the basement, all she knew was that he would bring them down there and they would hang out down there, but she didn't know what went on. All that she knew was that her grandson was bringing a lot of men into the basement, and she didn't know if they ever came out. She didn't know anything. All she knew was that there were a lot of boys down there, and that eventually a smell started coming from the basement, and she didn't know why. Dahmer's fourth victim was named Richard Guerrero, and just how Dahmer did with Jamie, Dahmer offered $50 for Guerrero to take some nude photos, and Guerrero agreed. They went back to Dahmer's place, and things went down as per Jeffrey Dahmer's new usual. Now, after Guerrero, there was a man named Ronald Flowers Jr. that Jeffrey lured into the basement, but as far as I believe, he made it out alive, because Jeffrey's grandmother went into the basement to check on them when he was down there with Ronald, and he ended up being okay, because Jeffrey was like, "I can't do anything today because my grandmother came down here and she saw me with him and shouldn't see anything bad because it hadn't gotten to that point yet, but he wasn't able to do anything to Ronald, thank God. But yeah. Now, because of Jeffrey's grandmother's rising suspicion and concern, like genuine concern for Jeffrey, his grandmother ended up, kicking him out. She requested him to leave her house, and he did, and ended up finding his own apartment. Now this is where the real shit starts, because not saying that this isn't, like, this up to this point wasn't real stuff, but this is where it gets very bad very quickly. He ended up living at the Oxford Apartments in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he lived in apartment 213, and that's where everything went down. Now, Dahmer ended up getting arrested for assaulting a 13-year-old boy, and that caused a halt in his killings for a little bit, but it didn't mean he was done. But unfortunately, Dahmer only spent a week in jail before he was released on bail. Now, Jeffrey Dahmer's fifth victim was named Anthony Sears, and he was killed just as all of the other ones were. And it's horrifying. It was just a pattern. Jeffrey found a way that worked, and he stuck to it every single time. The only thing that was different about Anthony Sears' killing was this is when Jeffrey genuinely started conserving and trying to keep his victims' parts. And yes, he did try that once before, but he sort of gave up on that for a little bit, and this is when he starts continuing to try preserving his victims' bodies and body parts. So, Jeffrey ended up cutting off Sears' head and genitals, and he soaked them in acetone, and he ended up keeping them in a little wooden box in his bedroom closet. And then, for quite some time, he ended up keeping that box at his own workplace, and no one noticed, no one blinked an eye, no one said anything about any sort of odor, anything like that. There was no concern whatsoever. Now, I apologize, I sort of got the timeline a little bit off. With Anthony Sears, he was still living with his grandmother, but now he moves to apartment 213 in the Oxford apartment. Jeffrey moved to these apartments in May of 1990. Now, in this apartment, he kept a 50-gallon jug type thing that he used to dissolve the torsos of his victims. And in this apartment is when he started his cannibalism journey. Other things that Jeffrey would do that began in this new apartment, now that he was by himself, he would take Polaroid pictures of his victims. Well, I shouldn't say it began when he moved, because he was already taking these pictures of his victims before them, because that's how he would lure them in. He would take pictures of them. So it started when he was still living with his grandmother, but it got worse when he moved, because he started documenting the dismemberment process and the killing process of his victims. Now, going back to the cannibalism aspect of this case, he didn't consume his victims because he was hungry for eating parts of a human. He consumed them for the sole purpose of feeling closer to them. He said in an interview that when he ate parts of his victims, such as their hearts, their biceps, he felt as if they were forever a part of him, which is absolutely insane. Like, what? It's a really hard thing to comprehend. It's just crazy, because how could a human do something so insane? This Jeffrey Dahmer, honestly, I wouldn't even consider him a human at this point. He is a genuine monster. And I'm gonna say is because whether he's dead or not, he is a monster. He will forever exist in people's minds, and that's just that. No one will ever be able to get over the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, after moving into apartment 213, Dahmer went on to kill 12 more men and boys. Now, Jeffrey went on to kill 12 more men and boys after his 5th victim, and I'm not going to tell the full story of each and every one of them. I'm going to say their names, but that's it. I'm not going to deep dive into each one, because then this video would be like an hour long. But there is a couple that I do want to tell the full story of, because it's very impactful. Now, a little side note before I get into this next victim that had a very strong impact on me when I heard about it. Just like I said, a side note, a lot of Jeffrey's victims, and when I say a lot, I mean most of them, were men of color. Most of them were black men. So, not that that really has much significance, but Jeffrey had a type. There was a pattern in the way that he killed, and a pattern in the type of men that he killed. And some of them weren't homosexual. They just were looking for a way to get money, and they took the opportunity to take some photos and get paid for it. Yet, the real thing that they got paid was not good. Alright, this next victim is quite crazy. He was a deaf man, different from Jeffrey's usual victims, because usually they can hear, usually they're not deaf. But this one was deaf, and sorry, I had to look back at the name. His name is Anthony Tony Hughes, and he was born deaf, and Jeffrey saw him at like a club, gay bar, where he would usually pick up his victims, and he took him back to his place. They communicated by mouthing words, and that's how they had conversations. And what was so sad about this is that, like I said, I'm not really going to deep dive into everything, because the details we already know how he did it. But what was sad about it is that Hughes couldn't hear Jeffrey's footsteps. He didn't see what was coming. He had no idea what fate held for him. So that definitely, like, I have goosebumps right now just talking about it. It's definitely a very impactful part of the story. Now, the next victim, I feel so bad because of this. I can't pronounce his last name, but his name was Konarak, and I'll put his name on the screen, but that was his name. He was a 14-year-old boy, and Jeffrey Dahmer lured him into his apartment, and let me just get into the actual story. Let's start from the beginning. Now, as much as my heart goes out to all the families of the victims, and as much as my heart breaks for all of the victims, this one in particular breaks my heart the most because this 14-year-old boy, as a 14-year-old girl, it really is heartbreaking to think about someone my age went through this thing. But what happened was, he had the chance to be saved. Jeffrey had started experimenting with drilling holes into his victims' skulls and injecting a chemical solution into their brains to sort of give them like a chemical lobotomy type thing, and to try to preserve them. Again, another experiment to try and preserve his victims' body parts, etc. And he did this to this boy after he was sedated, and it's so sad because the boy was drinking liquor at 14 with an old man. Like, not old, but in his eyes, he must have been old because he was an older man. But he drank the liquor, he was sedated, and then Jeffrey did the whole process to his skull, injected the fluid into his brain, and then Jeffrey went out. He went to get more liquor, and the boy ended up waking up, and he was obviously disoriented because he had a hole in his skull. He had this weird chemical fluid in his brain, and he was very disoriented. So he went out, and he was stumbling all over the place, and he was trying to find help. And then he ran into these 3 ladies, I believe it was. I'm not sure if the number's right, that's why I'm saying I think. But I believe it was 3 ladies, and they saw him, and then one of them called 911 and was like, hey, there's this young boy here, and he's obviously hurt, and he's beaten, and he needs help. The police come. They see the boy on the corner of the street with these 3 ladies, and the ladies explain how they found him. And then Jeffrey comes back, and he tells the police that this 14-year-old boy is 19, and it's his boyfriend. And this is the really disturbing part. The police, seeing the boy in his naked, disoriented state, allow the boy to go back with Jeffrey. The part that drives me the most insane is that the police escorted the boy back to apartment 213 with Jeffrey Dahmer. And then Jeffrey just carried out his plan. He put an even more lethal dose of the chemical in Conorak's brain, and that is what killed him. And then he proceeded to dismember him, and that was it. And another disturbing part about this is Conorak was the younger brother of the boy that Jeffrey Dahmer went to jail for essaying. And that boy got away from Jeffrey, but unfortunately, his younger brother did not. And his younger brother met his demise when he met Jeffrey Dahmer. So that is the victim that definitely touches me the most and hurts the most, because it's just crazy. Like, the justice system failed Conorak, and he did nothing to deserve that. None of these victims did anything to deserve what came for them, but this one definitely hurt the most. And I will admit, when I heard about this in the video I watched earlier, I cried. I did cry. It was the weirdest thing. I didn't expect to feel like that. but just hearing about it and talking about it, it hurts. Like, it's genuinely insane, the things that Jeffrey did. And he felt so confident because he had been getting away with these things, and it's insane. And no one should have to go through what these people went through. And it's a good thing that nothing like this has happened since then, but this is insane. I just looked back at the video that I watched, and the chemical that was injected into Conorac's brain was hydrochloric acid, and it was injected into his frontal lobe. Now, this is the most badass victim of all because he's the one who escaped and ended everything and saved whoever might have come next. And his name is Tracy Edwards, and he's a brave guy. What happened with him was, just like all the others, he got brought in to Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. However, this time it wasn't at a gay bar or a bathhouse like the previous victims. They met at a mall. And while I was watching this video that I got all this information from, I went on and searched up this man's name, and I found his testimony against Jeffrey Dahmer. And apparently he was at the mall with some friends, and that's when Jeffrey approached them and told them that they would get paid if if they allowed him to take nude photos of them. And Tracy, looking for some money, he agreed, and his friends were supposed to meet up with him and Jeffrey. And it's not like this was just a random guy. Tracy had met Dahmer a couple times prior to this specific night, but it was just like friendly hellos, how are you? Just like that, like just passing by. But when they got to Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, Tracy's friends were supposed to meet them back at his apartment, but Dahmer gave them, purposely, obviously, the wrong address. And a little while into the hangout, Tracy felt Dahmer put a handcuff on one of his wrists, and he was like, "Yo, what are you doing, man?" And then Dahmer attempted to put the other one on him, and Tracy didn't let that happen. And then Dahmer pulled a knife on him, and then Tracy started talking to Jeffrey and getting him to calm down. And then he asked to go to the bathroom, and then he came back and they drank some more, and then he asked to go to the bathroom again. Now, from the moment that Tracy entered the apartment, he could tell that something was off because there was a very foul smell coming from the apartment. And other tenants of that apartment building had made comments about the smell, and Jeffrey Dahmer just passed it off as it was spoiled meat. He would say, "Oh, my freezer broke," or "Oh, my fridge, it malfunctioned," things like that. And he would say that everything in his fridge spoiled, yada yada yada. Excuses, 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 covering up his crimes. But then, Tracy, after he asked to use the bathroom again, he saw an opportunity. He saw that Dahmer was calm enough now, and he made a run for it. He ran out of the apartment. He found help. He found a Milwaukee police officer, and he led them back to apartment 213. And Jeffrey Dahmer opened the door calmly, and he allowed them in. And the officer asked where the key to the handcuffs were, and Jeffrey Dahmer said that they were in his bedside table drawer, and he went to go grab for them himself, but the officers were like, no, back off. And so then the officers opened the drawer, and before they could even look for the keys was all his Polaroid pictures of the dismemberment processes of the bodies and the nude photos of the bodies, and alive and dead. He would take these nude photos. But they found all that, and along with the smell, and they could just tell. They were like, yeah, this guy is crazy. Especially with the witness there, Tracy Edwards. Thank you to Tracy Edwards, because he is genuinely a savior. He was very brave and very smart, and he knew he had to make a run for it and get out of there no matter what. So that's amazing, honestly, because without him, it would probably still be going on, this whole Jeffrey Dahmer case. And yeah, but so they ended up searching the apartment, the whole apartment, and clearing everything out. They took out the big jug of acid that was filled with body parts, and they cleared out his freezer and all that. Okay, so basically the last piece of footage got deleted somehow, and basically that was the end of the story. The only thing that happened after that is he got arrested, he got taken into custody, and he was in jail for a little bit. And then there was an incident in jail where he was doing some sort of, I think, cleaning a bathroom or something, which was like one of his only excuses to leave his cell. And he was doing it with 2 other inmates, and one of them got like tapped on the shoulder by one of the others, and he just flipped out and he killed both of the other inmates, one of them being Jeffrey. And yeah, that's how his life ended, and that's how the story ended. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. It was pretty time consuming,